Hotep, I'm Dr. Gloria L, Peace, host and producer of OmniU Presents the H3O Art of Life show. The title of this show is Know Thy Story, Know Thyself. And I have with me to explore the subject matter Hunter Haviland Adams III and Wayne Sebamurti Gentry. And I think that we will start with Hunter because Hunter, as I call him, is the man of the five stories, or the many-storied man, often talking about the history, our history and culture in terms of the stories we tell ourselves about ourselves, the stories we tell ourselves about others, the stories that others tell themselves about us, the stories others tell themselves about themselves, and the fifth story is the story that others tell the rest of the world about us. And Hunter goes very deep into that and then even brings up backstories and other stories, so we might be here for a while, Sebamurti, but we're going to start with Hunter.
Okay. Well, the whole notion of stories is that human beings are story-generating entities, is that our existence is lived through stories. Through stories we tell ourselves, stories that others tell themselves about themselves, that we're actually wired to generate stories, because generating stories is also generating meaning. Is that how do we make sense of the world with which we find ourselves in, of all its complexity and all the things that's going on. So there's always this search for meaning. What is the meaning of life? What is the meaning of my life? Then some people will say, well, what is my purpose? What is the purpose for life? Where does this purpose come from? Is it something that I discover, or is it something that I gradually evolve into? Is there only one purpose? Can my purpose change? And so that's looking at it from an individual perspective. But we are social beings. And so we have to look at the whole idea of generating meaning, generating stories from this more collective framework. And so because stories guide us or guide the next generation to how to live or how to meet contingencies that may befall future generations. Want to leave a mark as to, hey, this is what's going to happen. If you go over this ridge or cross that river, you got to watch out, because you may end up in territory where the people who are in that community may not be very friendly to you because they don't know you, because they're a different clan. So, the whole idea of stories and writing them out, there's recent research that points to symbolic narratives being constructed in South Africa 70,000 years ago, that the ancestors to the Zulu, Kung, and others, and that's speculation because we really don't know who these people were, but they took ostrich shells and wrote codes on the ostrich shells, different geometric symbols on these ostrich shells, and then when you put them together, you see that it formed some sort of code. So what were they coding for? What were they trying to express to the next generation? That's a mystery that's probably lost. But we can get some idea from rock art that they've left in caves and mines, and also in these standing stones, maybe about 3 hours northeast of Johannesburg. that form the oldest calendar. And so people, 70,000 years ago, Dr. Peace, 70,000 years ago, these giant standing stones, which resemble Stonehenge in Great Britain to a degree, and other stone alignments in Sudan and Egypt and Kenya. So they were developing a story about their relationship to the cosmos, to all of life, because all of life were teachers. They were telling them something. And so they were very observant of cycles of life, cycles of plant life, cycles of animals, cycles of the stars. And the stars were used to form a measuring, a reliable way to measure these cycles. And so from that, they generated these cosmogonies, or stories of the beginning, stories of how the earth formed, how life appeared, and so forth, way before what we know in the Old Testament, or the Epic of Gilgamesh in Babylonia or in China. These Africans developed these stories way before these other latecomers came. But the point is that we tell these stories because that's part of our neurobiology, that there's sections of our brain that are geared towards relationships with other people, the parietal lobe. You know, that's where we form relationships with other people. That's where we have images of other people, all the people that we interact with, you know, are dynamically, I won't say stored because that's not the proper term anymore for memory. You know, nothing is stored anywhere. It's a dynamic process of construction, reconstruction, and so forth, and disruption, and so forth. So I don't want to go off too much into that because, you know, we only got a short amount of time here. But, you know, the point that I'm trying to get at is that when we talk about stories, it's very important that we get our stories straight, because, you know, black folks in the world, African descendants, have had others create stories about us for other people, right? So
for their benefit.
Yeah, for their benefit and our detriment. Mm-hmm. So, you know, we have a story that you were slaves, for example, right? You know, there's a headline story in the Washington Post today, July the 25th, that talks about the slaves who built the Capitol. Well, slave, that's a political fiction. These were people who were captive who did that, who were under duress, who were forced to do this type of work. So when you say, when you create a narrative, slaves this, slave that, well, then you're taking away the humanity of those people. You're taking away their identity. You're destroying their dignity. And so we have to change that story. We have to create a new story that even, you know, you may not care for her politics, but even Dr. Condoleezza Rice, former Secretary of State, she said America has a birth defect, right? And this birth defect was the treatment of the captives, and that everything was done to try to manage that story. You know, not even put it in the Constitution, but, you know, it's there. Other laws were still there. And so she made the interesting claim that her parents taught her that we were founding families too, although, you know, we have to use the word family at that time kind of loosely. But the point was she recognized something wrong with the story, That's my point. And that we need to change this story, because we can never ever truly know ourselves if we're living out of the context of somebody else's story about us. We have to reclaim our story. And it's a huge job that people have been undertaking for centuries in trying to reclaim, reconstruct, reimagine what our story is and what it can be, because our future is at stake. You know, we have a generation who are disconnected from our larger story, just totally disconnected. Many of them, not all of them, because they're not learning it in schools. Schools aren't teaching our story. They're still teaching someone else's story about us. And that's something that, you know, people really have to come to grips with, that we're being taught a story about us by someone else for their benefit and our detriment, to keep us in the same state of not knowing who we are.
Well, that's a wonderful opening statement, and I waited because I thought when you said we have to create a story, I waited for you to correct yourself, because I know that you know that we have a story, and we don't need to create it.
No, we have to create a story.
No, we have to uncover the story that is hidden.
It's dynamic. We are creating, because our memory is dynamic, we are constantly creating and recreating. You know, there's nothing static. The only true story is a story one gets from going deep into meditation. Then you can know your real self. That's the unchanging story.
Which is why we have Sebamurti here, because this is the person who will focus us in maybe more precisely. One of the things you said, you know, when we ask a question about what is our purpose, first of all, the question is raised, who am I?
Yeah, who am I?
First of all, we have to get to that. Sebamurti, I want you to weigh in there.
That is
the question.
The question to be answered. And Hunter Adams did an extraordinary job talking
As
about
always.
the stories. So much, many layered meanings can be extracted from that. He's definitely right about the unchanging reality, which I'm reminded of what mythology addresses, because we also have a wrong understanding of mythology, because it has been associated with falseness. And that association came because people began to take the metaphors and symbolism on a literal level of trying to understand it. They concretized it. But the highest reality cannot be spoken about literally. It has to be spoken about in forms of metaphors, allegories, and symbols, and a story form. It's through the story form that you are introduced to the highest reality, because you cannot point to its existence in any literal way. And the highest reality is speaking about our own reality and knowing who we are, because essentially we all want to be happy, we want to be at peace, we want love, we want intelligence, but we want all of these things not knowing that our very nature is happiness, our very nature is intelligence, our very nature is love, and our very nature is peace. But when we move away from our nature, then we begin to think and feel that all of these things exist outside of ourselves. And then there we go in search of happiness outside of ourselves. And now happiness becomes something that we acquire in the forms of commodities and things that we own. We have to own and have things to feel happy. And we expect other people to make us happy, always from the outside. Intelligence becomes something to be measured. we have to be made intelligent. That is not something that already is our nature, and it's something that we look at as coming from the outside in. And then peace, we always look for peace in the world. We have to establish peace in the world for us to feel secure, and peace within ourselves, instead of looking within and realizing that peace is our nature. And then we expect others to love us to validate our own worth and value as human beings. So we're always looking outside, mainly because we don't know who we are. We don't know ourselves. And our ancient African ancestors went so far as to say, worship the gods if you must, but first know thyself. Because self-knowledge is the aim of life. It is the solution to all problems. It is the key in all forms of liberation, and it is the true source of all real power. And no change ever takes place without some expenditure of power. In fact, a working definition of power can be the ability to bring about a change when needed in spite of opposition. You need power to do that. We need power to change. And self-knowledge is the key to all real power. And it's also the catalyst to the maturation process of human development, because all organisms' main goal is to mature, become a complete mature organism. And nature has within its environment, and we have within our inner environment, everything that's needed for our maturation. However, human beings having a unique kind of consciousness that we have require enculturation and education in order for us to fully mature, because we must be self-realized. Survival and development is not enough to count for just complete maturation when it comes to human beings. We must know thyself and know who we are. And it's for the reason of needing culture and education that a society of people employ a process that must be undergone in order for the complete maturation of human beings. It's not left to chance. And our purpose is to know and be and express ourselves at all levels and at all dimensions of our being. And at the physical level and dimension, not much of our conscious participation is required for its maturity. Because as we age, we'll notice changes taking place that reflect physical maturity. Just in aging, you become an adult. But at the emotional, psychological, and spiritual dimensions of our being, a great deal of conscious participation is required. And so enculturation is employed to instruct and guide people through this process. And education. Education is not just to learn about matters and things of the world that and ways and techniques of how to get a job. It's managing the conventions of living. Your very humanity is to be educed. A human being left on his own without any enculturation will not develop all the things that characterized us as human beings. Your consciousness and the way that it can express itself to the highest level will not develop, and we'll be expressing ourselves very much like an animal. So enculturation and education is needed for our full maturation in order for us to know who we are. And to know thyself, there are fundamental prerequisites that are needed. And I would say, first of all, to kind of correlate with what Hunter is saying, we have to authenticate our knowledge and information, because much of what we have as a knowledge base is false. It's all wrong. It's full of stories that we have been told that is not accurate. A bunch of lies. It's not any truth in it. No facts in it. And many of us proceed through life and we encounter a lot of suffering and hardships and trials and tribulations because we never take the time to examine our knowledge to see if what we're using to guide ourselves in our living is adequate, if it's actual, if it's factual. We don't utilize any accurate. If we don't utilize any kind of discrimination to see whether or not we are really working with real knowledge. Many of us are working with belief systems because the type of learning that we experience in the institutions that are being called educational institutions was more of an indoctrination and a conditioning. We really didn't learn and we really didn't receive an education, which is about bringing forth that which within you. So you have to authenticate your knowledge and information, and you do this by studying the cultures and the wisdom teachings and the ways of living of societies of people who have demonstrated hundreds and thousands of years of living in great prosperity, authentic cultures. And we do this by studying the teachings, all of the truth that are being uncovered by our great scholars, Sheikh Anta Diop, John Henry Clark, Jacob Carruthers, so many of them. If I start mentioning them, they have pioneered and done great work to uncover the truth that's been hidden, to supply those who would like to keep us subjugated, dominated, controlled, their stories that they're telling about us, which sadly, the fact that we have gone through the enslavement and capture process, when you remove a people from the context of their culture, they have no connection to their language and their history, then they have no foundation, no roots. Just as a tree without roots cannot grow, people cannot grow without their knowledge being grounded in their history and their culture. So we have to authenticate our knowledge and information. And we have to purify, balance, and conserve our energy. And for time's sake, I'll move a little quickly through this. We have to purify our energy because it takes a tremendous amount of energy to know thyself. Because we're not just talking about knowing the local entity that we are identifying
the personality.
With, this personality. Knowing thyself and knowing consciousness is equivalent to knowing all there is to know. So it takes a tremendous amount of energy, and if we are contaminating our energy through wrong eating, through taking in toxins, drugs, and alcohol, usage of things like that that impairs our energy, imbalances us, and if we are living very immorally, if we are harboring a lot of negative emotions and we don't learn how to release those emotions and manage through them, then that's going to constrict our energy. It's going to imbalance our energy. It's going to subject us to being susceptible to diseases. And we have to conserve our energy and don't waste it in overindulgence nowadays in the usage of technology, which has seemed to taken over the communication technologies that we have. Everybody is locked into their cell phones and their texts. We got the internet, we got Facebook, we got Twitter, we have video games. So many of our men are addicted to video games playing, wasting so much energy and just consuming so much energy in that. So, and we need to discipline our attention, as Hunter mentioned, as far as meditation. And meditation is the disciplining of attention, whereby you disengage your attention from the physical, emotional, and the psychological complexes that's producing the ignorance, that's keeping us from knowing who we are. And it's through the discipline of meditation. Even the word medi, the root word, means to heal and it means to see. It's an inward seeing, and it's becoming whole, a whole human being when you engage in meditation. And in the ancient world, this was prevalent. It was not anything as an alternative practice or something that we resort to feel good. Drinking water, breathing, getting the sunlight, and meditating, all of those were common practices because it was understood this is how you become a fully mature, culturally mature, spiritually evolved human being.
Right.
And you do that through meditation and disciplining your attention. And also, transformation of consciousness. Your consciousness is to be transformed. And it's interesting, in the Sanskrit language, there are as many words that relate to consciousness as there are words that relates to snow in the Eskimo language, because they have systematically studied and they have meditated and they have had revelations and insights into the nature, functions, potentials, and abilities of consciousness, that they have words that relate to them. But here in the West, when we talk about consciousness, the first thing that comes to mind, and mainly does not go beyond that, are states of consciousness, like sleep, being awake, dream. Although there's a fourth state of consciousness called Turiya in Sanskrit, which many people do not speak about because that is not our experience here in the West. But consciousness have lines of developments. It has levels, stages, and dimensions, which all has to be transformed in order for us to know who we are. And then lastly, the expanding of awareness. As we do all of these, we purify our energy, we discipline our attention. We first start off with authenticating our knowledge and information, transform our consciousness, then your awareness expands now, and there will be a revelation of who you are, which is no one different from who you have always been, because you can never not be who you are, but you can be unaware of it. But in transforming your consciousness and disciplining your attention, engaging in meditation, you can discover who you are and know thyself.
You know, in order for us to do any of the things that we're discussing now, there have to be some basic assumptions. One assumption has to be that there is a self to know with which one may be unfamiliar. The other thing is there's a story to know with which we may be unfamiliar, or I'm going to concede to Hunter because he's very bright, that we need to create. But at any rate, we need to begin with the assumption that there is something we need to know, that it is knowable, that it is not only worthwhile knowing, but it is vital that we know our story, that we know the self, we know who we truly are, and not just these superficial personalities, these roles in which we operate on a regular basis, to the extent that they come to be who we think we actually are. And because I know that you're capable of having this conversation between you, I want to see where it goes.
Well, you know, talk about that, you bring to mind, you know, people need to know that there's something to know, that the religions that most of us have inherited package what the knowing is, right? This is what you need to know, right? You need to know God, right? Or some dimension of that, or a name, or whatever. And then once you know that, then this is what happens to you. Your soul is free. It's saved. You know, you may, if you're a male, you may have 70 virgins. Depends upon what the story is. So stories have been packaged to answer those questions. But today, because of the shrinking of communications, people are finding that those pre-packaged stories for the past few thousand years aren't fulfilling. That they want something else because they're just not working. Because the outcomes of how they live their lives haven't changed. They haven't gotten better. They haven't gotten more stable. You know, happiness is elusive. if it's even possible. You know, we got wars taking place literally everywhere, just about. Because those prepackaged stories, they're not delivering the way
The happy
people
endings.
expect them to deliver today in this complex world that we live in, with competing and clashing, contested stories. You know, you have people who say, well, my story is this. This is our space. You know, these immigrants, they need to be sent back to Honduras and Guatemala and wherever, in El Salvador, because they're immigrants. Wait a minute. Wait, hold it. You know.
Will the real immigrants please stand up?
Right. You know, everyone is an immigrant at some point in time, because we emerge in this space. We are immigrating into the world. So everyone is an immigrant in this larger sense, because we are coming into existence. You know, we are bringing life. Dr. King said something really profound in his speech about the Crete people, the people of Crete. And he was talking about Titus. And Titus, Paul was sending Titus a letter, and Titus was in Crete. He said, Titus was saying, man, these people in Crete, boy, they are some rough folks. You know, they don't know how to live. They this and that. They're messy. They're nasty. I don't want to be here. And so the point that Dr. King was making with this letter of Paul to Titus is that, what did Booker T. Washington say? Cast your buckets down wherever you are. Mm-hmm. The point is that he was saying, as Jay Carruthers said, how do we get out of this mess? Mm-hmm. Right? The real deal is life is not given. You create life. By your actions, you create life, not simply your physical existence. You had nothing at all to do with that. You, as the entity that you've come to know throughout the years, and all the masks that you've worn and so forth, stories you've learned and told yourself. But you create life. You create meaning for yourself. And so if you depend upon or allow, concede others to create meaning for you, you can never know yourself, because you've got a barrier that has to be transcended. You have to do some real deep introspection to recognize what this barrier is, to penetrate that, to go beyond it, or to turn these obstacles into opportunities for spiritual growth. And so people don't know. They think they know, but they really don't know. There's facts that we know. There are facts that we think we know. Then there are facts that you were taught that you believe are facts, but they're not. They're not. And so people are living off facts that they were taught that are opinions, that's someone else's story. It has nothing to do with them, themselves, because they have to discover and work. You know, you talk about know thyself, that's some work. You know, you just don't get that, oh, I think I'm gonna know myself today. I'm gonna sit down here and do these mantras or chants, you know, call on Jesus, and boom, I know myself now. It don't work like that, because you have to restructure your entire brain. You got to create something called neuroplasticity. You have to create new pathways for yourself.
And then
and
you
the
have
other
to,
ones have to die
And then
out.
you have to get past that big bad ego.
Oh yeah, you that has to be destroyed.
has
that
at
has to
least
be
be
destroyed.
managed.
Well, it really has to be destroyed because your enlightenment will be momentary. You may have this great insight for a moment and then it's gone, and now you back into the world again with all your problems, with all your perspectives, with all your ego-ness. Then you may meditate a little bit more and then bam, wow, I saw it. I saw the light, right? I saw it. Dr. Peace, I saw it. Do you know what that means? I saw it. And then it's fleeting. It goes away. So now what? You've got to start all over again. You have to work at this. It takes years of practice, not something that you can, people do yoga because, they're trying to slim their bodies, not to enhance their consciousness. They got the wrong purpose for doing yoga. Or they're trying to do meditation for stress relief. Oh, I'm dealing with these microaggressions on my job. I think I'm gonna meditate, for 10 minutes. I'm sorry, 10 minutes, am I right? 10 minutes are not gonna get it. You know that.
Right.
You can't meditate for 10 minutes and then transcend. You're kidding yourself. You're kidding yourself. And so when you start looking at the stories of masters to see what they did, now you got examples. You have a benchmark that you have to strive for. And that's different. That's really different. But, people are grieving because there's a whole lot going on that they don't understand. They are searching for solutions, and, someone does a media campaign, but, radio stations still play the same negative music in a rotation 20 times a day that's socializing and acculturating young people to not value themselves, creating a story for them that keeps them locked into a certain state of consciousness from which most will not be freed from or won't know how to free themselves from. And so these nickel-dime solutions just don't work. You can pray all you want to. I said this in Washington, D.C. I'm sorry. You can believe in prayer all you want, but you can't pray away some things. You got to work at them. You got to get other people to do that. You have to look within yourself to find something that allows you to have a grander vision, possibility of life, of thinking of possibilities, not improbabilities. So people are they're not even trying to know themselves because the self that they're trying to know has already been packaged for them. This is what you have to do, so you can spend $900 to go to Jay-Z and Beyonce, 60,000 other people, because that was packaged for you. This is the life that you want, not a life that's looking within.
Your happiness is out there.
Right.
The geography of your life is external. The self you're seeking is out there.
Right.
You have images of that self on television all day long. You should be blonde. You should be slim. You should be a skeleton, in fact.
Or you should be ratchet.
You should certainly not have any of the attributes of African people, because that is not a desirable self to be. But authenticate your knowledge base. Authenticate your teachers, because certainly your knowledge base is in part coming from who is instructing you, who is telling you your stories, whose stories you're accepting. Talk about that a bit.
Okay, I'll talk about that briefly because I want to get to the question that you asked. My take on that too, of course, there's the inner and the outer teacher. And that which they all both hinge on you and the inner teacher and the outer teacher, is attention. Because regardless of how great a teacher is and how resourceful they can be, if the person does not pay attention, no learning takes place. So learning really takes place when the attention is given. And a real good teacher is one who can stimulate the attention-giving abilities of the person who the message is being attempted to be conveyed to, the meaning. So real learning and all learning takes place in attention. And by that right, you are your teacher, your own teacher in the truest sense of the word. You are that. But to get back to your question when you asked, and how do we know that there is a self to be known? The one thing that you cannot deny, or you can deny pretty much everything else, you cannot deny your own conscious existence. You can't deny the fact that you are conscious. That is probably the most direct experience that you are having, because there must be something conscious to even put forth the denial, which cannot be denied. So it is always present. Now, that conscious knowing implies a knower, and those two are not separate. That knower is who we are referred to as the self, that which knows. And knowing in terms of being aware, everything takes place, all of our experiences, everything is taking place within the context of our conscious awareness. Everything we speak about, everything we think about, all our impulses, everything that we feel is taking place within a backdrop of an awareness that does not change. And we are impulsed to be aware and know that which is knowing. This is one of the things that we're always in search of also, which is ourselves. We're actually in search of knowing who we are. And meditation helps you to know that there is a self to know. But what becomes complicated in this conversation and coming to understand what we're meaning by self is that there are assumptions that we all have the same understanding of what the word self connotes. Mm-hmm. And for most people, self is connoting an individual. But the self that is seeking to be known by all human beings is a one self. There's really only one self having the experience of throughout all life forms. Mm-hmm. And that self is spirit. As an African proverb said, if it exists, it's most assuredly is spirit. And when we want to know ourselves, we want to know ourselves at the level of spirit, the fact that we are spirit, which expresses itself as life, which to me has no opposites. That birth and death are opposites, being that they are the entrance and the exit. Dead and alive are opposites. Living and dying are opposites. But life has no opposite. Life always is, and everything is life. There are after-death experiences for the consciousness that is expressing and living in this body. There are experiences that we don't become exposed to in our education here in the West, but those of us who have studied the Eastern spiritual teachings know through the Purdam Heru and even Tibetan Book of the Dead, misnomer as the Tibetan Book of the Dead, the Bardo Tarlo, that there are after-death experiences for life. So there is no death to something that is our essential nature. It's never born, never dies, and always is. And the purpose of our life is to awaken to that reality while we're still in this, what they call living bardo. This life is a continuum, and living is just a rim that is life is expressing itself through. Death is another bardo, another rim. Birth is another rim. Then ultimate reality is another. So there is a self, but the only way that we are going to come to know thyself, which will not be a self different from anybody else, is to disengage our attention from all of these stories and complexes and thought constructs that are appearing to be real but are false and can only be seen as false when you summon up the requisite amount of energy and discipline your attention so that you can pierce through the falseness and see the reality as it really is.
Hunter?
I wouldn't hear what you're going to say.
Well, what I wanted to say, which is less important, but important in the sense that people will say, well, this is just me. This is just how I am, you know, especially if you're objecting to some particular behavior. Well, this is just me. You know, if you don't know me by now, you'll never know me, you know. The presumption is that this personality that you have assumed before you ever knew that you were being endowed with a personality, living in context of other people who were telling you stories about who you are and the meaning and the intention behind various acts and behaviors that you presented before them, you know, like teachers telling students that they are dumb, like some parents telling their children, you're just like this bad parent or that parent who was no good, this sort of stuff. You get this personality, you know, you're endowed with this personality without your request. And, you know, you learn that you are either this person who is highly regarded or this person who is not very valued. This may be more the experience of black people in the context of this country, that we are undervalued or if valued at all, and consequently there is some standard or there's some goal of trying to become good enough to gain approval, to be validated, to be endorsed by people who have announced through their story that they are superior, that they are supreme, and that we are inferior. And so we keep trying to shake off this cloak of inferiority, and we keep trying to jump through hoops and perform tricks so that we will finally be able to be regarded as at least, you know, in the room, if not in the family. At least, you know, we can be the darker brother who sits at the table when company comes. This sort of thing. So we're suffering. We have an identity crisis because we don't know who we are on the superficial personality level. And so if we're not troubled by that, then certainly how can we arrive at an assumption that there is a self, a collective self, to which to aspire? The first thing we have to do is be dissatisfied with this image that we have been given and that is being given to the world of who we are. And we have lots of historical images, which, as you pointed out, you know, our scholars have unearthed for us and helped us to see thousands of years of history of a people who were noble and who gave the world, not contributed to a world that was already going on and they just came in and pitched in, but people who gave the world its foundation, you know. And so when you talk about slaves, quote, quote, building Washington, first of all, these human beings were people with skills. They weren't just labor. They weren't just a labor force that you sent in to dig holes. They were people who were surveyors who could lay out the territory and who could erect the buildings that still stand. So that, you know, why are we able to want to know these stories about ourselves? Why do we reject our history so often that I don't want to learn that black stuff?
Well, people have been socialized for that, and, you know, from decades of socialization and miseducation, as Carter G. Woodson would call it, that's just par for the course. However, many people today, you know, there's an undercurrent that's taking place among, you know, 30-something folks that, thanks to the raw racism being shown the President of the United States and the First Lady, you know, as well, because they've had some horrific depictions of her that the right-wing folks have put out there. But thanks to the rawness of the hatred, many younger people, utter contempt, many younger people are saying, whoa, wait a minute, because they've been sheltered, you know, coming up on The Simpsons and Friends and BET, you know, they've lived a sheltered existence. And so this is a new reality that they have to confront. So you got the dream defenders in Florida, Philip Agnew and his group, that I say, wait a minute, occupying the state capitol for almost 40 days a few years ago after Trayvon Martin's murder. So there's a gradual emergence of younger people who want to know a story, want to know our true story, and they're searching. They're searching. I ran into some brilliant young people when I went to hear Professor James Small at the National Black United Front meeting while I was in DC. You know, I mean, who are really searching.
But Hunter, because I'm looking at 5 minutes here.
Oh man!
Wait a minute.
5 minutes.
Do we have the time for the emergence? I mean, for this to gradually dawn on our people when we are hemorrhaging young people, they are being slaughtered in our streets? Do we have time for the brilliant, talented 10th to emerge into some self-conscious black people who want a story? Or do we have to be more radical in our approach to seducing our people out of the state of amnesia, cultural amnesia, in which we seem to be mired?
Well, it's a formidable challenge because you have 7 major media companies that work 24/7 to pitch a certain way for people to be and to see themselves. I mean, all people. They got stories, you know, if you are the Duck Dynasty type, you know, they got a story for you. You know, if you're the stupid blonde type, you know, they got a package for you. And so
That's what they got. What's in our arsenal?
You see, that's where we have to be in control of the institutions, the media, and everything that helps to shape and guide, instruct the consciousness of our children. Because even Amos Wilson in his book, Awakening the Natural Genius, the Black Child, we start off ahead of everybody. And we do everything before every other ethnic group. But yet, when we enter into school, all of a sudden, the lights begins to dim.
But the children are in our homes first. We bring them home from the hospital. They are with us first.
And we suffer
and
the
with
same
us
things.
all the time. Mm-hmm. So can we not engage in this child development? Can we not engage in these storytellings?
Sure, absolutely we can. When you have to start where you're at. You have to start with small groups who have this type of knowledge and work there. I mean, it's not going to happen for 40 million people. That's not going to happen no time soon because we don't have control over the media. We don't have control over our communities.
Well, there's an on and off switch on that box in the living room. We have greater control than we exercise.
If we don't have time for me to talk about the neuroscience of why that happens, but there is a neuroscience to what's going on. There's something known as neuromarketing, where folks are put in scanners, given all sorts of tests to develop products, develop cues for ads, to develop social programs for people to keep folks where they're at. That's the objective.
So dumbing down the community is what we finally
making dumber.
Well, that's dumbing down. All
Dumb
right.
and dumber.
Okay, we just, I will not leave on the note that we are impotent, because I know that the power to which Sebamurti spoke is where he says it is, and that is within us. And we cannot be deprived of that power because we brought it with us when we came.
That's right.
We
Absolutely.
still have it.
Absolutely.
We have to tap on it. We have to utilize it.
That's right.
I'm glad I had you here.
I'm glad I'm here.
Sebamurti,
Thank you for having me.
Thank you very
we
much
never
for
do
being
finish
here.
these, but we can always give it a shot.
It was just getting interesting at the end.
Well, we have to warm up.
That's how it all